I'm looking at the relationship between moral responsibility and the ability to do otherwise. And in part two here, I'm going to respond to the Frankfurt style examples that we described in part one. Now, just to be clear where we're at here, I'm defending the claim that the conditions of moral responsibility, this principle I'm calling CMR, that for any event that occurs at a certain time t, such that that event E has moral significance, a human agent is morally responsible for that event E if and only if she has the capacity to act rationally, that includes a moral sensibility, and autonomously, that includes the ability to do otherwise, in relation to event E, that is prior to it occurring at T or at T itself. So that's the thesis. And the Frankfurt style examples have called into question the part of the thesis related to the ability to do otherwise. Now, what I'm doing here is presenting what, of course, opponents have called the flicker of freedom. So often in philosophy, positions that are meant to be pejorative are finally just accepted. The title is accepted by the proponents, and I'm following that tradition here. I'm also following an early response to Frankfurt style examples proposed by Peter van Inwagen. And I claim that events are individuated by their causal origin. That is, the same event only if the same causal origin. So you have to have that causal origin being the same in order for it to actually be the same event. Now, if we are properly fine-grained then about events, we can respond to the Frankfurt style examples by agreeing, in most cases, that is, agreeing that the individual in question is morally responsible, but add that alternatives exist. And of course, if alternatives exist, then the Frankfurt style examples do not accomplish what they are intended to. They do not show that having alternatives are not necessary for moral responsibility. Okay, so let's apply this. In first generation situations, the kind of scenario that Harry Frankfurt himself described, we have this. Either event X occurs as a result of agent P doing action A. So that's a person does an action resulting in event X without process Z's influence. So either they do it on their own and the external person doesn't intervene, or a different event occurs. Event Y occurs as a result of Z causing the person to do A. And it's not the case that X is identical with Y. These are two different events. They might be described the same. For example, Jones shot Smith at the meeting, but they're not actually the same event. Now, let's apply these in second gen cases, and then what we have to say is going to follow through to apply to all types of Frankfurt style examples. In second generation situations, we have event X occurs as a result of P doing A. So this is the overdetermination case. And also as a result of Z occurring. Or event Y, a different event, occurs not as a result of P doing A, but only as a result of Z occurring. And again, it wouldn't be the case that X equals Y because you have different causal origins for X than you do for Y. In one case, P is involved by doing an action. In the other case, P is not involved and does not do the action. So this response to Frankfurt style examples is given in terms of events, right? That's how I've developed it. But what I say about events will provide an adequate basis for responding to multiple varieties of Frankfurt style examples. So sometimes they're framed in terms of actions, but we could talk about events in the same way, or we can modify what we're saying about events to talk about actions. It can be applied, in other words, to a variety of ways that Frankfurt style examples are presented. Okay, the third type of Frankfurt style example that I mentioned was that of an omission. And here with an omission, we do need a historical approach, and that seems plausible to do so. So what happens with omissions is we can trace an event, the omission, to a previous decision that was made. So for example, when Dave forgot Julie's birthday, he thought about writing it down on his calendar, but he decided not to. He thought, oh, I'm going to remember this. I won't need to write it down. Well, that was the decision then that may have led to the omission, that is, forgetting Julie's birthday. And we can trace that back to that conscious decision, the action or the event, if we like, of Dave not writing it down in the calendar. Okay, so then, of course, once you have history invoked here, this is going to apply to the fourth generation that combines all three of the previous ones. Now, this suggestion has been not met with broad acceptance. Okay, I'll put it that way. So proponents of Frankfurt style examples like John Martin Fisher reject this, and their rejection is about the robustness of the flicker. They say this little flicker of freedom isn't significant enough, right? Fisher argues that the alternatives described in a flicker of freedom approach are not robust enough to ground moral responsibility. Now, that's how he phrases it. They're not robust enough to ground moral responsibility. And it's not exactly clear when he had made this objection what exactly he meant by grounding. So there are two aspects to his objection. Now, I should say his view, to get a little feel for it, he says it's just puzzling and unnatural to suppose that an alternative pathways that were not taken would be the kind of thing that would provide grounds for moral responsibility. So that's the idea. It's like, well, why would this alternative be significant? Now, there are two aspects to his objection. Again, the grounding aspect. What does it mean to ground moral responsibility? So I'll address that. And then the robustness aspect. Is the flicker robust enough to do the job that I want it to do? So let's consider responding to the grounding aspect. There are a couple ways of understanding what Fisher means by ground. So I'll address both of these. It seems like Fisher might mean providing a sufficient condition for moral responsibility. That's what it seems like in a natural reading. And if Fisher understands grounding as providing the sufficient conditions of moral responsibility, well, the distinctive alternatives do not ground moral responsibility. They don't provide sufficient conditions for moral responsibility, but no one claims that. My principle that I've described does not claim that. We shouldn't expect the mere presence of alternatives to do so. Reason and having the moral capacity are parts of that conditions of moral responsibility. So you also have to have that. You can't expect mere alternatives to be sufficient for moral responsibility. And that's built into my principle. Now, if Fisher understands grounding as providing a necessary condition for moral responsibility, well, then consider that the agent in question has a minimal option. Do what she in fact did, or refrain from doing what she did. And And that is choice enough to provide a necessary, again, not sufficient, but a necessary condition for moral responsibility, to do what you in fact did or refrain from doing that. And that is significant. That's important. So let's move on to the robustness objection. We've addressed the grounding objection. So if the person could have refrained from causing what she did, then it seems a significant alternative was available, right? Now, some may object that the alternative is not morally significant, since in some cases it involves a non-intentional omission, right? Like Dave didn't intend to forget Julie's birthday. It's not something that may be chosen or intentionally willed. So again, though, we can look into the robustness of the moral significance, right? What common cases of negligence, first of all, let's think about this. Common cases of negligence can show that we can be morally responsible for consequences that were not intended. So intent at the moment doesn't mean that you're not morally responsible, right? The problem is what you've done prior to that moment that brought about. So also, just let's think through a case with an assassin who hesitates. So let's say the intervener wants the assassin to kill a certain person in a JFK-style parade going by. They only have a short window of taking the shot. And if they don't take the shot, the other person's going to intervene and cause them to shoot. So let's say an assassin hesitates. There's something morally significant within him that makes him question for a moment, should I really be doing this? And he never consciously decides not to shoot, but that hesitation, of course, is long enough to cause the intervener to intervene. He simply refrains momentarily, but the alternatives available there are morally significant. That pause, that hesitation based on his previous moral character that he's developed causes that hesitation, and that seems to be significant for moral responsibility. So let's draw our conclusion and wrap this up regarding Frankfurt Style examples. If we distinguish events by causal origin, then in every Frankfurt Style example where someone really is morally responsible, then there is an alternative present. As we've talked through this, right? There's always an alternative to do the action or not to do the action. That is reason to believe that the presence of that alternative contributes to, and it's necessary for, moral responsibility of the agent. Now, again, it's not sufficient, but I don't claim it is, and I don't know of anyone who would claim it is. We all understand that there are other aspects here, like a moral sensibility and reason that that are contributing to moral responsibility. So we can conclude that the position that the ability to do otherwise is necessary for moral responsibility, like I claimed in the CMR principle, and that should not be rejected on the basis of Frankfurt Style examples, despite many efforts to show that it ought to be. I maintain that those efforts fail.